The Death World's Children. The silence in the Helios Ring council chamber was the kind that followed bold proclamations, not respectful, but anticipatory, waiting for the punchline. Lord Commander Sareth's crest flared brilliant crimson as he gestured with all four arms toward the human delegation's modest podium. 3 systems, he repeated, his vocoder translating his clicks and harmonics into flat galactic standard. Your species controls barely 40 worlds. The Dominion offers generous terms. Refuse, and we will take 6. Marcus Hale did not rise to the bait. He'd studied Sareth's file during the 3-week journey to Helios. A career military officer, decorated in 4 campaigns against species that had folded quickly. The Corps fought with overwhelming force and expected submission. They had never encountered sustained resistance. "Lord Commander," Marcus said, his voice carrying easily in the amphitheater's acoustics, "I need to make something clear before this council proceeds." Sareth's translator clicked with what the linguistic AI flagged as contempt. "Speak quickly, mammal. The Dominion's patience is not infinite." Marcus looked up at the tiered seats where 200 species watched. Some were genuinely ancient. The Vren had been spacefaring when Earth was still cooling from its formation. Others, like the Corps, had merely been lucky, finding easy worlds and slower neighbors. "You don't want humans to notice you," Marcus said quietly. The chamber erupted, not in alarm, but in laughter. Even some of humanity's trading partners seemed amused. The Sethian ambassador's tongue flickered in what their culture considered polite mockery. Sareth's crest blazed brighter. "Is that a threat from a species that has existed in this chamber for less than 1 standard cycle?" "It's a warning," Marcus replied. "There's a difference." He activated his podium's holo display. Earth appeared, rotating slowly, not the gleaming blue marble of propaganda, but a scarred world of violent weather patterns, tectonic instability, and orbital mechanics that produce regular extinction events. Earth has a surface gravity that makes most of your homeworlds seem like vacation resorts. Our atmosphere is poisoned to 60% of known oxygen breathers, too much of it delivered too efficiently. Our weather systems routinely generate storm cells that could level your capital cities. Our oceans contain predators that evolved for 60 million years to be nearly perfect killing machines, and our land masses aren't much better. The laughter had faded somewhat. The Vrin representative leaned forward with what might have been interest. Marcus continued, his tone unchanged, delivering a briefing rather than a threat. "We evolved alongside parasites that hijack our neurochemistry, bacteria that swap genetic code faster than we can develop treatments, and viruses that kill millions before we can respond. Every human in this room carries more foreign organisms in their body than there are stars in some of your territories. We exist in a state of permanent biological warfare." "Ancient history," Sareth interrupted. "You have medicine now, climate control, comfortable cities." His mandibles clicked dismissively. "We do," agreed, "because we had to develop them. Because our world demanded adaptation or death, and we chose adaptation every single time." He paused. "And sometimes we chose death anyway. Our own deaths, because we were better at killing each other than the planet was." The holo display shifted, not to weapons or battles, but to a graph, a simple line showing human population over time. The line rose, crashed, rose again, crashed harder, rose once more. "We have come within a few thousand individuals of extinction at least 3 times that we can document genetically. Ice ages, supervolcano eruptions, plagues, and each time the survivors looked at what killed them and said, 'That won't work twice.'" Marcus met Sareth's cluster of black eyes. "We don't fear extinction, Lord Commander. We've been there. What we fear is being unprepared for it." The Vrin representative spoke for the first time, her voice like wind through crystal. "What is your point, Liaison Hale?" "My point is that when humans identify a threat, we don't just respond to it, we study it, we simulate it, we build redundancies and contingencies and countermeasures until the threat isn't just neutralized but becomes impossible." He looked around the chamber. "We do this automatically now. It's not a choice. It's how we survived when our own planet was trying to kill us." "You speak of your world's dangers as if they make you special," Sareth said. Many species face challenges. Yes, Marcus acknowledged, but most species faced one or two existential filters and got lucky. We faced dozens, simultaneously, for our entire evolutionary history. And then, when we developed intelligence, we became our own worst threat. We have fought wars so total, so brutal, that we invented weapons capable of rendering our entire planet uninhabitable. We built them for the thousands. We pointed them at ourselves. The chamber was quiet now. And we didn't use them, Marcus said softly. Not because we couldn't, not because we didn't want to, but because even in our worst moments, even when our fear and hatred ran hottest, we remained capable of looking at the precipice and stepping back. He paused. That's what Death World evolution creates. Not monsters, not warriors, but survivors who can weaponize anything, including restraint. This council does not respond to intimidation, Sareth declared, though his crest had dimmed slightly. I'm not trying to intimidate you. I'm trying to warn you. Marcus deactivated the holo display. You don't want humans to notice you, Lord Commander. Because once we do, once we identify you as a threat that needs solving, we will apply the same ruthless efficiency to you that we applied to every predator, plague, and existential risk that ever threatened us, and we will not stop until the problem is solved permanently. The Dominion does not fear. You should, Marcus interrupted, and for the first time his voice carried an edge. Because we don't fight wars to win territory or prove strength. We fight wars to eliminate threats, completely, permanently. We will study your tactics, your technology, your culture, your biology. We will find every weakness and exploit it. We will turn your own systems against you, and we will do it with the same methodical patience that let us survive 10,000 generations on a world that wanted us dead. He straightened his uniform. So I'm asking this council, begging it really, to help me prevent that. Because if the core Dominion forces us to notice you, I can't promise you you'll still exist as a polity when we're finished. The vote was close, but the council declined to intervene. The core Dominion, insulted and defiant, mobilized its fourth battle fleet within 60 hours. Admiral Keiko Tanaka watched the core fleet enter the Aurora Reach system on schedule, almost to the minute. Her predictions team had given the enemy arrival window a 96% confidence interval. They'd been within 8 minutes. They're holding formation Delta 7, her tactical officer reported. Standard core intimidation approach, maximum visibility, weapons hot, broadcasting dominant signals. Predictable, Tanaka murmured. The Corps had fought 6 major conflicts in the past 2 centuries. Humanity had compiled every scrap of data on each one, fed it through military AI, and built response doctrines specifically for this moment. Just in case. Humans always planned for just in case. Aurora Reach status. Last civilian transport cleared the mass limit 40 minutes ago. The planet's running skeleton crew, all volunteers, all combat rated. Surface installations are fully automated. Tanaka nodded. When the core fleet had begun mobilizing, Aurora Reach's 90,000 colonists received a simple message. Evacuation Protocol Theta. You have 72 hours. They did it in 60. No panic, no chaos, because every human colony had evacuation protocols. Every human settlement had practiced them. Because preparation wasn't optional, it was survival. They're scanning the planet, Tactical reported. Confusion on their command frequencies. They expected resistance or panic. They're getting neither. Let them wonder, Tanaka said. Mines? AI swarms are in position, awaiting your authorization. The core fleet had brought overwhelming force. 40 capital ships, 100 support vessels, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. They'd broadcast their intentions clearly, surrender or face annihilation. They had not noticed the 300,000 autonomous mines, each smaller than a human fist, each smart enough to coordinate with its neighbors, that had been seeded throughout the system over the past week. They had not detected the 30 human stealth frigates holding position in the system's debris fields. They had not realized that every piece of data their sensors collected was being fed through human AI that predicted their next 7 moves. Lord Commander Sareth is broadcasting surrender demands, communications reported.
He's giving us 1 standard hour. Tanaka checked her chrono. He's punctual. Predictions team? 92% confidence he proceeds to bombardment when the deadline expires. 8% chance he sends a boarding party first to establish dominance. And if we surrender? He'll demand Aurora Reach's colonial governor submit in person, then execute them on broadcast to establish core authority. Then he'll claim the system and use it as a staging point for deeper incursion. This is their standard protocol.
Tanaka felt the familiar ice settle into her chest, the same cold clarity that humanity had cultivated for millennia. Not rage, not fear, just the absolute certainty that a threat had been identified and would now be eliminated. "Authorization granted," she said quietly. "Execute contingency apex." The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 90 seconds. The mine swarms activated simultaneously, 300,000 pinpricks of thrust vectoring toward core ships at velocities that made them effectively invisible until impact. Core point defense systems, designed for large missiles and fighters, couldn't track targets so small and numerous. The mines didn't explode. That would have been wasteful. They simply penetrated hulls and released nanoscale disassemblers that began converting ship systems into more copies of themselves. While core crews scrambled, the stealth frigates opened fire with weapons the Dominion's intelligence had never seen. Humanity's magnetic acceleration technology, refined and perfected in secret, throwing projectiles at relativistic speeds. No energy signatures to track, no missiles to intercept. Just kinetic mathematics. 7 core capital ships vanished in the first salvo. 20 more were crippled before they could return fire. And then the boarding began. Human combat shuttles, invisible to core sensors until they locked onto disabled ships, delivered teams wearing powered armor that made them look like mechanized demons. The core were strong, individually superior to humans in close combat. But humans fought like nothing the Dominion had ever encountered. Coordinated, ruthless, and absolutely unwilling to stop. They used the core's own ship layouts against them, fed by real-time AI mapping. They exploited every structural weakness. They showed no mercy, but took prisoners efficiently because intelligence was valuable. Lord Commander Sereth, trapped on his flagship's bridge as human soldiers cut through his honor guard, finally understood Marcus Hale's warning. It wasn't a threat. It was an autopsy report, delivered in advance. The transmission reached the Galactic Council 6 hours later. Not from the core Dominion, their 4th Fleet had gone silent. From Liaison Officer Marcus Hale. He stood in the same simple uniform. No triumph in his expression. Behind him, projected on the chamber's displays, was the Aurora Reach system. Intact, defended, and now surrounded by the remnants of a core fleet that had ceased to exist as a military force. "Members of the Council," Marcus said quietly, "humanity has exercised restraint. We have disabled the core fleet. We have taken prisoners. We have not retaliated against Dominion territory. Yet." The chamber was absolutely silent. "But understand this. You have now seen what happens when humans notice a threat. When we focus. When we apply the lessons learned from 10,000 years of surviving on a world that demanded perfection or death." His voice remained calm, factual. "The core Dominion is fortunate. They attacked a prepared colony. They followed predictable doctrine. They gave us time to evacuate civilians and optimize our response." He leaned forward slightly. "If they had attacked without warning, if they had targeted Earth or our core worlds, if they had killed civilians before we could respond," he let the implication hang, "then you would have seen what happens when humans stop being careful." Marcus straightened. "We are returning all core prisoners unharmed. We are withdrawing from the disputed border systems because we never wanted them anyway. And we are formally requesting that this council establish clear protocols for conflict resolution because humanity prefers diplomacy."
The Vrin representative found her voice. "And if such protocols are violated again, then the violators will learn what it means to be noticed by a death world's children," Marcus said simply. "We don't start fights, but we end them, permanently." The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, Lord Commander Sereth, stripped of rank, transmitted from human custody, was given an opportunity to address the council. His crest was pale, his posture defeated. "They knew everything," he said, his voice hollow through the translator. "Every formation we would use, every tactic we would try, every mistake we would make." He looked up at the assembled species. It wasn't a battle. It was an examination. They dissected us. The Vrin representative asked the question everyone was thinking. Did they seem angry, vengeful? Sereth's crest flickered once, a core gesture of absolute despair. No. That's what makes them terrifying. They weren't angry. They were just solving a problem. 6 months later, Marcus Hale submitted his resignation and returned to Earth. He had delivered his warning. The galaxy had learned its lesson. His work was done. On his final day at Helios Ring, the Vrin ambassador requested a private meeting. "May I ask you something, Liaison Hale?" she said, her crystalline voice gentle. "Of course, Ambassador. That speech you gave, about humans noticing threats, about your world's dangers," she tilted her head. "How much of it was exaggeration, performance?" Marcus smiled slightly. "None of it, Ambassador. That's the terrifying part." He stood to leave, then paused. "We didn't evolve to conquer the galaxy. We evolved to survive the most hostile planet anyone has ever documented. Everything we do, our technology, our tactics, our entire civilization, is just applied survival instinct. And the thing about survival instincts, they don't turn off, ever. Then why show restraint at all? Because," Marcus said softly, "the final lesson our death world taught us was the hardest. Sometimes the greatest threat we face is ourselves. And surviving that threat required learning when not to optimize for victory. We're very good at learning lessons. We have to be. Our planet never gave us a choice." He left Helios Ring without ceremony, returning to the quiet blue marble that had forged humanity in fire and ice and plague and war. Behind him, the Galactic Council began drafting new protocols, establishing boundaries, creating frameworks for coexistence. And across 200 species intelligence networks, a new warning appeared in threat assessment databases. Do not provoke humans, do not threaten humans, do not make humans notice you as a problem to solve. Because death worlds don't create warriors, they create survivors. The problem solvers. 18 months after Aurora Reach. The Helios Ring had become quieter since Marcus Hale's departure. Trade routes flourished. Border disputes were settled through arbitration. The core dominion, reorganized under new leadership, focused on internal reform rather than external expansion. The galaxy had found an uneasy equilibrium. But equilibrium, as humanity had learned over millennia, was always temporary. Dr. Sarah Chen barely looked up when her research station's proximity alarms began their soft chime. The automated survey platform Distant Shore had been cataloging stellar phenomena in the Perseus arm for 8 months without incident. Alarms usually meant a meteorite shower or electromagnetic surge, routine enough that the AI handled them. "Dr. Chen," the AI spoke with unusual urgency, "you need to see this." Sarah pulled her attention from the protoplanetary disk data she'd been analyzing. "What am I looking at?" "Approximately 4,000 vessels just translated into normal space, 7 light-years from our position. Architecture is consistent with the Zelthic Condorta." Sarah's hands went still on her keyboard. The Zelthic Condorta occupied a region of space humanity had barely charted, 300 systems along the galactic rim.
isolationist by policy, and xenophobic by culture. They'd refused all contact with the Galactic Council for centuries. 4,000 ships, she repeated quietly. That's not an exploration fleet. No, Doctor, based on energy signatures and formation patterns, I estimate this represents approximately 60% of the Condorda's total naval capacity. They're heading toward Council space. Current trajectory suggests they'll reach the outer colonies within 3 weeks. Sarah was already moving, her scientific work forgotten. She'd been a researcher for 15 years, but before that, she'd served 8 years in Earth's Navy. Every human who ventured beyond the core systems had military training, not because humanity was militaristic, but because preparedness was survival. Send everything to Earth Command, Priority Alpha. She strapped into the station's command chair. And get me Liaison Hale. Dr. Liaison Hale, retired. I know. Get him anyway. Marcus was in his garden when the call came. He'd spent the past 18 months trying to remember what peace felt like, tending vegetables, reading books that had nothing to do with xenobiology or military doctrine, learning to sleep without planning contingencies. His personal calm
To solve the problem, Marcus finished quietly. The old ice was already settling into his chest. He'd hoped never to feel it again. Send me everything you have. I'll be at Geneva Command in 6 hours. He ended the call and stood in his garden for a long moment. Then he went inside to pack his uniform. Because humans didn't choose to be problem solvers. They'd been shaped into it by a world that demanded solutions or death. And that shaping didn't wear off just because you retired. Geneva Command Center, Earth. The war room was already crowded when Marcus arrived. Fleet Admiral Okonkwo stood at the center of a 3-dimensional tactical display showing the entire sector. Around her, representatives from every branch of Earth's defense apparatus studied the data streaming in from remote sensors. Marcus, Okonkwo's greeting was economical. They'd worked together during the core crisis. Thank you for coming. Do we know what they want? No, the Zelphic haven't communicated with anyone in 200 years. They've rejected every council overture. Their territory is completely closed. She gestured at the display. Until 3 days ago when this fleet emerged and began moving toward council space at maximum burn. Marcus studied the formation. 4,000 ships in a complex, layered structure, not the standard military configuration of any known power. Analysis? A younger officer, Commander Therese, according to his name tag, spoke up. Best guess? Religious crusade or ideological purge. The Zelphic are known to have a rigid cultural hierarchy based on genetic purity. They may have decided the council represents a contamination that needs cleansing. Worst guess? Therese's expression darkened. They've encountered something that scared them enough to break 2 centuries of isolation. And they're running toward us, not away from it. The room went quiet. Marcus felt every person present do the same calculation he was doing. If something could frighten a civilization of 300 systems into abandoning their isolationist principles, it wasn't going to stop with the Zelphic. Have we tried to communicate? Marcus asked. Every frequency, every protocol, Okonkwo confirmed, silence. We even sent them the standard human greeting, mathematical sequences, hydrogen emission wavelength, the works, nothing. Marcus turned to the cultural specialists. What do we know about Zelphic psychology? Dr. Amara Osi, head of the Xenopsychology Division, pulled up a sparse file. Very little. They've been in self-imposed isolation since before humanity reached the stars. What we know comes from intercepted transmissions and third-hand accounts from species that traded with them centuries ago. She highlighted key points. Rigid caste system, genetic modification is sacred to their culture. They believe in something they call the purity, the idea that their genome represents an ideal that must be preserved and enhanced. Supremacist ideology, someone muttered. More complex than that, Amara corrected. It's not about dominating others, it's about isolating themselves from contamination. They view other species the way we might view infectious diseases, not with hatred necessarily, but with an absolute imperative to maintain separation. Marcus absorbed this. So what would make them abandon that separation? Something they view as a greater threat than contamination, Amara said quietly. Admiral Okonkwo pulled up a new display, the galactic map with the Zelthic fleet's trajectory marked in red. They'll reach the outer council systems in 3 weeks. The Vreen are calling for a united defense. The core, what's left of them, are offering to join a combined fleet. She looked at Marcus. The council is asking for human assistance. Asking or demanding? Asking. After Aurora Reach, no one wants to make demands of humanity. Okonkwo's smile was grim. But they're scared, Marcus. 4,000 ships is more than the entire council fleet combined. And if the Zelthic are running from something worse... Marcus studied the map, his mind already working through scenarios, contingencies, the cascading probabilities that humans had learned to calculate instinctively. What's our fleet status? We have 80 capital ships available for immediate deployment. Another 100 in reserve, but they'd take 2 weeks to fully mobilize. Okonkwo met his eyes. Not enough to stop 4,000 if it comes to battle. It won't, Marcus said with certainty. How can you know that? Because if the Zelthic wanted a fight, they'd be moving differently. This formation, he gestured at the tactical display, it's defensive. They're protecting something or running from something. He turned to Amara. You said that genetic modification is sacred to their culture. Central to it, their entire civilization is built around perfecting their genome. Then they're not coming to destroy the council. Marcus felt the pieces clicking together, the pattern recognition that Death World evolution had honed to perfection. The room erupted in skepticism, but Okonkwo raised her hand for silence. Explain. They're isolationists. They've maintained total separation for 2 centuries, despite every economic and political pressure to engage with galactic civilization. That kind of dedication to an ideology doesn't break without an existential threat. And he pulled up the Zelthic fleet composition. And look at their formation. It's not an invasion force. Those outer layers are science vessels, not warships. The military ships are arranged to protect them. You're saying they're refugees? I'm saying they're a civilization in crisis who finally realize they need outside help, and they're scared enough to abandon everything they believe in to get it. She met Okonkwo's gaze. The question is, what scared them? The answer came 3 days later, transmitted from a deep space monitoring station at the edge of explored space. Dr. Chen's voice was tight with tension as the recording played in the war room. This signal was intercepted from inside Zelthic territory. I'll just show you. The display filled with what looked like a star system. Then the perspective shifted and Marcus realized he wasn't looking at planets orbiting a star, he was looking at ships, hundreds of thousands of ships. Each one massive, arranged in perfect geometric patterns around a structure that defied immediate comprehension. What am I looking at? Okonkwo asked quietly. We're calling it the assembly, Chen said. It appeared in Zelthic space approximately 4 months ago. No warning, no transit signature. It just was there. She zoomed in on one of the ships. Individual vessels are approximately 2 kilometers in length. Total count is estimated to over 700,000, and that structure at the center is roughly the size of Earth's moon. Marcus felt his blood turn cold, not from fear. Humans had learned to convert fear into something more useful long ago, but from recognition. This was the nightmare scenario, the one that kept military planners awake at night. A threat so large, so advanced, so utterly beyond current capabilities that standard doctrine became meaningless. Have they communicated? He asked. Yes, with the Zelthic. Chen pulled up another file. We decoded this 6 hours ago. The message was simple, rendered in mathematical precision that transcended language. Genetic divergence detected. Correction required. Submit for reintegration. The room went silent. Reintegration, Marcus repeated. They're treating the Zelthic like what? A failed experiment? A corrupted database? Amara had gone pale. The Zelthic have been modifying their genome for millennia. If this assembly represents whatever civilization they originally diverged from, and that civilization views genetic modification as corruption, then the Zelthic aren't running toward us. Taurus finished. They're running away from forced extinction. Admiral Okonkwo looked at Marcus. So what do we do? Marcus stared at the display.
700,000 ships, technology that could appear inside defended space without warning, and a civilization that views genetic diversity as an error to be corrected. Every tactical instinct screamed that this was impossible, unwinnable, a threat so overwhelming that even humanity's death world advantages became irrelevant. But humans hadn't survived 10,000 years by accepting the impossible. "We do what we always do," Marcus said quietly. "We notice the problem, we study it, we find the weakness, and then we solve it." "How do you solve something like that?" Marcus looked at the assembly again. Perfect geometric patterns, flawless coordination, ships arranged with mathematical precision. And suddenly he saw it. The weakness that would let a death world species survive the unsurvivable. "The same way we solved every other existential threat," he said. "We be unpredictable. We adapt. We do what no perfectly ordered civilization could ever anticipate." He smiled, cold and certain. "We improvise." Okonkwo studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "How many ships do you need?" "All of them. And I'll need to talk to the Zelthic fleet before they reach Council space. Because if we're going to save the galaxy from something that views diversity as an error, we're going to need the most stubbornly diverse, genetically chaotic, absolutely impossible to predict species in known space." "Humanity," Torres said. "No." Marcus pulled up images of the Galactic Council. 200 species, each one unique, each one its own world's crucible. Because the Assembly made one critical mistake. "What's that?" Okonkwo asked.
They assume that evolution only creates one kind of perfection. Marcus met her eyes. They've never encountered a death world species. They don't know what happens when you try to correct something that survived by being absolutely, defiantly, magnificently incorrect. The transmission went out on all frequencies, in all languages, to every council member, and to the approaching Zelthic fleet. "This is Liaison Officer Marcus Hale of Earth. We understand your situation. We're coming to help. And to anyone else who's listening, you just noticed us. That was your first mistake. Your last mistake will be assuming we follow anyone's definition of perfection. In his garden, tomatoes rotted on the vine. But humanity had work to do. Imperfect solutions. The Zelthic fleet, 6 days later. The meeting took place aboard the Synthesis, the Zelthic flagship, in a conference chamber designed for beings who viewed physical perfection as a moral imperative. Everything was symmetrical, surfaces gleaming with antiseptic precision. Even the air felt sterile. Marcus Hale sat across from Architect Prime Savros, the Zelthic leader, and tried not to think about the fact that he was probably the first unmodified human Zelthic had allowed within a kilometer of their ships in 2 centuries. Savros was tall, nearly 3 meters, with skin that seemed to shift through subtle color gradations as he moved. His eyes were multifaceted like an insect's, but burned with unmistakably human-like intelligence. Every aspect of his physiology had been optimized over generations. He represented what the Zelthic considered the pinnacle of genetic engineering. He also looked terrified. "You received our data transmission?" Severus's voice was melodious, carefully modulated. Even his speech was engineered for efficiency. "We did." Marcus had reviewed the files during the trip. The Assembly had given the Zelthic 40 days to submit for correction, a process that would apparently revert their entire species to some baseline genome the Assembly considered acceptable. Refusal meant eradication. "Tell me about your history with them." Savros's color patterns flickered. "Distress," Marcus's xenopsychology briefing had told him. "We believe we were alone, that our ancestors had achieved the purity through isolation and discipline." His multifaceted eyes fixed on Marcus. "We were wrong. The Assembly represent our origin, the civilization our founders fled 3,000 years ago. They did not permit genetic modification. They viewed it as corruption of the template. So your ancestors stole ships and ran? They sought freedom to pursue perfection as they understood it." Severus made a gesture that might have been a shrug. "The Assembly did not pursue. We believed we had escaped. Instead, it appears they were simply unaware of our existence until recently. What changed? We do not know. Perhaps our technology reached a threshold that became detectable.
Perhaps they simply finished cataloging other regions of space. Severus's colors dimmed. It does not matter. They found us, and they view 3,000 years of our civilization as an error requiring correction. Marcus leaned back, studying the architect prime. You came to the council because you need genetic diversity. Zavros's colors went completely still, surprised, Marcus guessed. How did you... Marcus leaned back, studying the architect prime. You came to the council because you need genetic diversity. Zavros's colors went completely still, surprised, Marcus guessed. How did you... You're bringing science vessels, not just warships. You abandoned 2 centuries of isolation, and you're talking to me, an unmodified human who probably represents everything you've been taught to avoid? Marcus kept his voice gentle. The Assembly wants to revert you to a baseline genome the Assembly considers acceptable. But you've spent millennia modifying yourselves. You need fresh genetic material, unpredictable, chaotic, diverse, to create something they can't predict or correct. For a long moment, Severos said nothing. Then his colors flickered through a rapid sequence. What Marcus's briefing said was their equivalent of bitter laughter. We are called supremacists, isolationists, genetic purists, who view other species as contamination. Severos met Marcus's eyes. And now, we must beg those species to help us contaminate ourselves thoroughly enough to survive. Not contamination, Marcus said quietly. Adaptation. There's a difference. Is there? We viewed our modifications as perfection. The Assembly views them as corruption. You would view them as adaptation. Perhaps all 3 perspectives are correct. Zabros's color settled into what might have been resignation. We need your help, Liaison Hale. All of you, humanity, the Council, even species we would have refused to acknowledge 6 months ago. We need your genetic chaos. Your beautiful, terrible diversity. In exchange for what? Everything we have. Our technology, our knowledge, our ships. He gestured around the pristine chamber. Our humility, though that might be worth less than the rest. Marcus thought of Earth. Chaotic, violent, beautiful Earth, where humanity existed as a species precisely because their ancestors had been adaptable enough, diverse enough, crazy enough to survive the unsurvivable. The Council is assembling a unified fleet, Marcus said. Humanity is contributing everything we can spare. But you need to understand something about Death World species, Architect Prime. What is that? We don't do perfection. We do good enough to survive one more day. We're messy, chaotic, and half our systems barely work. Marcus smiled slightly. But we're very, very good at not dying. And if the Assembly thinks they can predict us, predict any of us, they're about to learn why order always loses to chaos in the long run. Council Fleet Assembly Point. 14 days later, Admiral Okonkwo stood on a bridge of the UNSS Persistence and watched the fleet form up around her flagship. It was the strangest armada in galactic history. Human ships, sleek, aggressive, built with the assumption that survival meant being ready for anything. Core vessels, massive and ornate, their new commanders eager to prove their reformed dominion's worth. Vreen crystalline ships that looked like they'd been grown rather than built. Sethian biomechanical hybrids that seemed half alive. Even the Zelthic had contributed their science vessels, each one a masterpiece of engineering. 200 species, 3,000 ships total, facing 700,000. Tactical. Tell me this isn't insane. Commander Torres pulled up the analysis his team had been running for days. By every conventional metric, this is suicide. The Assembly has overwhelming numerical superiority. Their technology appears to be several generations ahead of ours. And they've demonstrated the ability to appear inside defended space without warning. So why are we here? Because Liaison Hale asked us to trust him. And because he found something. He zoomed in on a section of the Assembly formation. The display showed one of the Assembly's geometric patterns, ships arranged in perfect mathematical precision. Torres overlaid human analysis. Notice how they move? Perfect synchronization, no deviation, no individual initiative. They're coordinated. So what? They're too coordinated. Watch what happens when we simulated introducing chaos. Torres ran the simulation. A single ship moving unpredictably caused the formation to ripple, recalculating, adjusting. They're networked, probably hive-minded or controlled by a central AI, which means they're optimized for fighting opponents who follow predictable patterns. I see where you're going, and we don't. We can't. You've got 200 species here, Admiral. Each one evolved on a different world, developed different tactics, think in fundamentally different ways. Taurus pulled up the fleet roster. The Sethian use biological weapons that adapt in real time. The Vreen generate interference that doesn't follow physics as we understand it. The core fight with honor codes that seem crazy to everyone else and humanity. We're Deathworld survivors who turned improvisation into doctrine. Exactly. The Assembly has never encountered anything like this. They're built for perfection. We're built for survival. And survival is always messier than perfection. A communication icon flashed. Marcus Hale transmitting from the Zelthic vessel where he had embedded himself to coordinate with their scientists. Admiral, we're ready on our end. The Zelthic have agreed to the plan. Tell me again why this will work. Marcus's face on the screen was calm, but Okonkwo could see the Deathworld ice in his eyes, that absolute certainty that came from his species that had solved every impossible problem evolution had thrown at them. Because the Assembly thinks in terms of correction and reintegration. They're trying to solve a problem, genetic divergence. But they're doing it the way a computer program does. Identify error, apply fix, verify result. He smiled slightly. They've never encountered a problem that refuses to be solved, that mutates faster than they can correct it, that turns their solution into a new problem. You're going to make the Zelthic into a weapon? I'm going to help them become what they've always been afraid of, genuinely unpredictable. He gestured to someone off-screen. We've combined Zelthic genetic engineering with human adaptive techniques, Vryn quantum uncertainty principles, and Sethian evolutionary acceleration. The result is, well, calling it chaos would be generous. And this will stop 700,000 ships? It'll give them something they can't process. An error that spreads faster than they can correct it. A problem that solves itself by becoming worse. Marcus's expression hardened. The Assembly built themselves to be perfect. We're going to teach them why perfect systems always fail when they meet something that thrives on being broken. The Assembly fleet appeared exactly on schedule, translating into Council space with the same mathematical precision they brought to everything. 700,000 ships in perfect formation surrounding the massive...
Savros made a sound that might have been a laugh. Then he triggered the release. Across the Zelthic fleet, serum canisters opened. Every volunteer, and there were thousands, driven by desperation and something that might have been curiosity, received an injection of what human scientists had started calling adaptive chaos. It was a mixture that should have been impossible. Human genetic repair enzymes that favored variation over stability, Vryn quantum-locked proteins that existed in multiple states simultaneously, Sethian evolutionary accelerators that normally took generations but had been compressed to minutes, and Zelthic engineering that kept the whole mess from immediately killing its host. The result was unpredictable. Savros was the first to change. His carefully modulated skin patterns went wild, colors that shouldn't exist, sequences that had no meaning in Zelthic culture. His height shifted. His multifaceted eyes began restructuring themselves in real time. "Report," Marcus said quietly. "I am..." He paused, his voice fluctuating between octaves. "I am experiencing sensations that have no precedent in Zelthic experience. My genetic structure is refusing to stabilize. It's adapting to inputs I'm not consciously aware of." His colors flashed in alarm. "This is what you feel? Constantly?" "Not exactly. Humans are genetically stable. We just evolved on a world that punished stability, so we got really good at changing everything else." Marcus watched the medical readouts. "You're experiencing engineered chaos. Your body is trying every possible adaptation simultaneously. It's terrifying and messy and absolutely impossible to predict. And this will save us? Watch." The Assembly had been analyzing the Council fleet. calculating the optimal approach for correction. Their formations began to shift, mathematical perfection in motion, preparing to demonstrate why order always triumphed over chaos. Then the Zelthic Savros made a sound that might have been a laugh. Then he triggered the release. Across the Zeltic fleet, serum canisters opened. Every volunteer, and there were thousands, driven by desperation and something that might have been curiosity, received an injection of what human scientists had started calling adaptive chaos. It was a mixture that should have been impossible. Human genetic repair enzymes that favored variation over stability, VRIN quantum-locked proteins that existed in multiple states simultaneously, Scythian evolutionary accelerators that normally took generations but had been compressed to minutes, and Zelthic engineering that kept the whole mess from immediately killing its host. The result was unpredictable. Savros was the first to change. His carefully modulated skin patterns went wild. Colors that shouldn't exist, sequences that had no meaning in Zelthic culture. His height shifted. His multifaceted eyes began restructuring themselves in real time. "Report," Marcus said quietly. Savros paused, his voice fluctuating between octaves. "I am experiencing sensations that have no precedent in Zelthic experience. My genetic structure is refusing to stabilize. It's adapting to inputs I'm not consciously aware of." His colors flashed in alarm. "This is what you feel constantly?" "Not exactly. Humans are genetically stable. We just evolved on a world that punished stability, so we got really good at changing everything else." Marcus watched the medical readouts. "You're experiencing engineered chaos. Your body is trying every possible adaptation simultaneously. It's terrifying and messy and absolutely impossible to predict. And this will save us? Watch." The Assembly had been analyzing the Council fleet, calculating the optimal approach for correction. Their formations began to shift, mathematical perfection in motion, preparing to demonstrate why order always triumphed over chaos. Then, the Zeltic ships broadcast the first volunteer's genetic signature. The Assembly's response was immediate. Every ship's weapons went dark, not powered down, just frozen. Because the Assembly's central coordination node was trying to process what it was seeing. A Zelthic life sign that matched their database but also didn't. Genetic structure that was somehow both their baseline pattern and something completely alien. An error that was simultaneously correcting itself and becoming worse. It was the AI equivalent of encountering a paradox, a problem that couldn't be solved because the solution kept changing faster than it could be calculated. "All ships." Admiral Okonkwo's voice came over the fleet channel. "Execute protocol chaos." The Council fleet didn't attack, not with weapons. They attacked with information. Every ship began broadcasting genetic data, human DNA sequences that made no sense outside of Death World context, VRIN quantum patterns that violated causality, Scythian evolutionary code that evolved in real time, core genetic markers deliberately engineered to contradict themselves. And through it all, the Zelthic volunteers, thousands of them now, each one undergoing their own unpredictable transformation, broadcast their constantly changing signatures directly at the Assembly central node. The perfect geometric formations began to waver. Ships that moved in flawless coordination for millennia started to drift. The mathematical precision that had defined the Assembly for generations began to collapse as their central node tried to process the impossible. Errors that corrected themselves into bigger errors, genetic divergence that spread like wildfire, diversity that refused to be categorized. "It's working," Taurus reported from the Persistence. "Their network is fragmenting. They're trying to isolate corrupted nodes, but the volunteers are generating new variations faster than they can track." Marcus watched Savros, whose body had settled into something that resembled his original form, but was fundamentally different. Asymmetrical, constantly shifting, beautiful in its chaos. "How do you feel?" "Liberated," Savros said, his voice filled with wonder. "For 3,000 years we pursued perfection. We thought the purity was the answer. But this beautiful, terrible chaos, this is what life actually is. Not perfection, not order, just constant, messy, magnificent adaptation." The Assembly's central node was flashing now. error messages cascading through its network. It had been built to correct genetic divergence, but it had never encountered divergence that accelerated faster than correction could be applied, that turned correction itself into a vector for more chaos. It was dying, killed not by weapons, but by information it couldn't process. "Admiral, now," Marcus said calmly. Okonkwo gave the order. "All ships target the central node, maximum firepower. 3,000 ships from 200 species opened fire with every weapon they possessed. Not because the assembly fleet was defeated, most of their ships were still functional, but because the networked coordination that made them dangerous was collapsing. The massive moon-sized structure at the heart of the assembly's formation shattered, and with it, 700,000 ships went dark. Their networked intelligence fragmented beyond recovery. 3 hours later, Marcus stood in the synthesis's observation deck with Savros, watching the human salvage teams begin the delicate work of capturing assembly vessels intact. The technology alone would advance the Council civilization by decades, maybe centuries. "We won," Savros said, but his voice held confusion. "We defeated 700,000 ships with chaos and information. This shouldn't have been possible." "It's always possible," Marcus replied. "Perfection is fragile. It requires every component to function exactly as designed. But chaos is resilient. You can break half of it and the other half will adapt, evolve, find a new way forward. That's what evolution creates. Not perfection, just whatever's good enough to survive one more generation. And now we are, what? No longer pure, no longer Zelthic as our ancestors would define it. Now you're survivors, same as the rest of us," Marcus smiled. "Welcome to the galaxy, Architect Prime, the real one, where nothing's perfect, everything's messy, and somehow we all keep going anyway." Savros's colors settled into something new, a pattern that would become the mark of post-assembly Zelthic, a symbol of the day they learned that survival mattered more than purity. "Your species," Savros said slowly, "you've lived with this knowledge forever, that perfection is impossible, that chaos is inevitable. We had to. Our planet demanded it." Marcus thought of Earth, violent, dangerous, beautiful Earth, where evolution had thrown every challenge imaginable at humanity, and somehow humanity had persevered. We learned a long time ago that the goal isn't to be perfect, it's to be adaptable enough that imperfection doesn't matter. "And that's why you're so dangerous." It wasn't a question. "That's why we survive," Marcus corrected gently. "There's a difference." Helios Ring 2 weeks later. The Galactic Council chamber was crowded for the first time in years. Representatives from all 200 species had come to witness the formal treaty signing, not just with the Zelthic Conduit, but with the thousands of assembly ships that had been recovered, their AI cores reprogrammed, their perfect order replaced with something more flexible. Marcus stood at the human podium again, wearing his simple uniform, no medals despite having just saved galactic civilization. The Vryn ambassador spoke first, her crystalline voice carrying easily through the chamber. "Liaison Hale, you told this council once that we did not want humans to notice us as a threat. Today, you demonstrated that when humanity notices a threat, the solution is not always destruction." Marcus nodded. "We learned something from the assembly. They thought perfection meant eliminating variation, but variation is what makes life resilient, what makes it survive." He looked around the chamber. "Humanity isn't special because we're strong or smart or particularly good at